Welcome, CGS colleagues, students, faculty, friends, and family for joining us at what really is one of my very, very favorite events of the year. There are few things I enjoy more than our 3MT competition. I'm really pleased this year that the Council of Graduate Studies in Canada and El Consejo Mexicano de Estudios de Posgrado, or COMEPO, are able to also send representatives, which makes this year's 3MT truly a North American event. Just a few guidelines before we get started. First, I do want you to know that the session is being recorded and will be made available after the session. As you have time, please post questions in the chat. If we have time, we will ask audience questions during the discussion session after the voting period. And just a reminder, only event attendees are allowed to vote. So please do not share voting information with others who are not present. As we get started, I really would like to thank and recognize Scott Lanyon, Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Education at the University of Minnesota, and moderator and master of ceremonies for today's event. Thanks so much, Scott, for your support of your students of this event and all of your service to the graduate education community. I would also really profoundly like to thank ProQuest, a part of Clarivate, for their support of this 3MT showcase, and equally importantly, of their longstanding investments in CGS and graduate education. I would especially like to thank ProQuest for their contributions to three among many events. The ProQuest CGS Distinguished Dissertation Awards, which honor outstanding early career scholars, and the 2021 award winners were announced in December at the CGS annual meeting. Also for their co-sponsorship with ETS of our most recent global summit in 2019 on the cultural context of health and well-being in graduate education. And third, for their participation in CGS as a sustaining member, part of the membership network at the visionary level. Thank you so much, ProQuest, for being such a valued partner and helping CGS to advance graduate education and research. And so at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce Julia Smith, who serves as Director of Academic Relations for ProQuest, where she manages content acquisition relationships with universities in Australia, New Zealand, and North America. She has worked in academic affairs at the University of Michigan, at Columbia, Harvard, and holds a doctorate in higher education research from the University of Michigan. Julia, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. It is a great pleasure to be here today. At ProQuest, we place tremendous value on our long-term partnership with CGS, and I personally always look forward to the 3MT Awards with a great sense of anticipation. While 3MT competitions have been around for a while now, it's worth taking a minute to reflect on how they developed and why they are so important today. The idea for 3MT came about at the time when the state of Queensland in Australia was suffering from severe drought. To conserve water, residents were encouraged to limit their showers to 3 minutes. The dean of the graduate school at Queensland University, Professor Alan Lawson, had an epiphany. He realized that the 3-minute time frame was just enough to distill the complex ideas that are generated in a lengthy dissertation, and simultaneously maintain the attention span of an audience unfamiliar with the topic. He put 2 and 2 together, and the idea for the 3MT competition was born. The first 3MT competition was held at the University of Queensland in 2008 with 160 doctoral students, and now 3MT competitions are held in 85 countries and at 900 universities across the globe. Because of its clear pedagogical value, it is also expanded to include master's students. So the 3MT has not only endured the test of time and geography, but with the technological disruptions of the pandemic era, It's proven to be a worthy pedagogical exercise, one that certainly helps students prepare for the workplace. The importance of being able to call attention to, distill, and clearly, quickly communicate complex ideas just gets more important every year as the amount of information we all encounter increases in scope, speed, and volume. At ProQuest, we take the compilation and curation of complex ideas very seriously. And that is why we are able to boast the largest curated database of dissertations and theses in the world. We added more than 250,000 theses and dissertations to our database last year. These included graduate works from universities in 10 countries that were not previously represented in our collection, including Chile, Botswana, Japan, the Czech Republic, and South Africa, among others. And perhaps even more exciting is that we are now pivoting to a platform that will extract citations and citation connections between theses, dissertations, journal articles, ebooks, historical newspapers, and more. That big, important launch will occur in March, and I urge you to stay tuned. And with that, I will hand off to our moderator for today's event, Scott Lanyon.
Thanks very much, Jillian. If I could have the next slide, please. So just to start, I'd really encourage you to modify your Zoom presentation by selecting the side-by-side speaker option from the view menu up there in the upper right of your screen. And then click and drag the bar that separates the presentation from my face, I guess, to the left so that they're more equal size, and that will help you to see both the presentation and the presenter. It's a tremendous honor to moderate this event. This is, like Suzanne, one of my favorite events of the year. And in fact, I'd say that one of the most important things that I've done as a graduate dean to communicate the importance of grad ed to the Board of Regents at the University of Minnesota was actually to have 3MT presentations to the board. And I can tell you, it was very effective at educating the board as to what graduate education is all about. Now, I'd like to begin by asking this year's participants to turn on their video, if you would. And for those of you who are new to 3MT, just a reminder that this is a 3-minute presentation. I really challenge all of you to think about how much you could convey in 3 minutes. The students here today are going to demonstrate exactly how successfully that can be done. It's an opportunity for them to learn this exercise on how to share their skills and knowledge with a lay audience in a reasonable period of time. I can have the next slide, please. So today's event features students who were recognized as winners at the annual meetings of 6 regional associations of graduate education in the US and Canada: the Canadian Association of Graduate Studies, the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools, El Consejo Mexicano de Estudios de Postgrado, Midwestern Association of Graduate Schools, Northeastern Association of Graduate Schools, and the Western Association of Graduate Schools. Now, following today's presentations, we're going to ask this talented group of students to share their experience about participating in 3MT so that those of you attending today can learn from their insights. And then, just as we did in previous years, the CGS will conduct a People's Choice competition, and the winner will receive a prize of $2,000. And we'll provide you with instructions on voting in a bit later. So we're going to do some presentations, some Q&A, during which time there'll be this online People's Choice voting, and then we'll announce the winner. Now I'd like to introduce this year's participants in the live event. Next slide, please. From Memorial University of Newfoundland, Olatunji Anthony Accarelli. From University of Toronto, Faraz Aladina. From the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, Angel Badawolet. From the Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Occidente, Isabel del Palacio. From Indiana University Bloomington, Vishak Iyer. From the University of Colorado Denver, Gabriela Main. From the University of Oklahoma, Ali Razi. And from Cornell University, Bhargav Sanketi. From Old Dominion University, Austin Tapp. And from Simon Fraser University, Elena Varner. Now, I want to thank you all in advance for your participation in this. Now let's get started. And again, for the best view, make sure you've changed to side-by-side speaker view and changed the frame so that you can see the presenter as well as the slide. Each presenter will signal their readiness to begin by asking for the next slide. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn off their slides except for our first presenter. So may I have the next slide, please? Our first presenter, Olatunji Anthony Kakareli, omega-3 intake during pregnancy, finding perfect maternal diet for brain health.
I am ready for my slide now. Just take a look at the smile on this adorable baby. We all see this as a picture of perfect health with no stress or at least no COVID-19 to worry about. But what if the future mental health of this baby has already been shaped during pregnancy? According to the Canadian Mental Health Association, 1 out of every 5 Canadians will experience a mental disorder every single year. And it's even shocking to know that Newfoundland has the highest rate of separation due to mental illness in Canada. And despite the huge effort channeled by the government into finding the cause as well as the care of these mental diseases, it often feels as if we are fighting a losing battle. I'm sure some of you are wondering by now, what is the correlation between mental health and pregnancy? I will get to that in a minute. In the early 80s, Professor David Barker was the first person to tell us that what mothers eat during pregnancy has a profound health implication on their babies. What does this mean? This means that most mental disorders are likely have been programmed during pregnancy. So, what is a possible solution to this global problem? Before I get into that, how many of you have heard that eating fish is good for you? Yes, that's exactly how my PhD comes in. There's a unique nutrient found in fatty fish known as omega-3 fatty acid. It has been shown to be important in the growth and the development of the brain of babies. And in my PhD research, I developed a mathematical model to determine the adequate amount of omega-3 required for a healthy brain development during pregnancy. And as of today, we have successfully tested my mathematical formulation in mice. And it is so fascinating to see that mice consuming adequate amount of omega-3 do not only have high omega-3 in the brains of their babies, it also increased the secretion of neurotrophins. Do not worry. Neurotrophin is just the name for a group of chemicals that maintains the integrity of your brain even as you grow old. So let's step back a little bit. For those of you that bake at home, you would agree with me that the taste as well as the keeping quality of your cake is dependent on your recipe, right? In the same vein, my PhD will ensure that all babies get an appropriate dose of omega-3 in their brain during pregnancy. And with this promising alternative, we can secure a healthy mental health for every baby, even before they are born. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. That was exactly 3 minutes. May I have the next slide? Our next presenter is Faraz Aladina, Persuading Princes, Persuading People, The Stories of Attar, a 13th century Persian poet.
Ready when you are? At the beginning of the 1001 Nights, the famous Arabian Nights, we read of a fictional ancient empire whose territory spanned across India, Iran, and China. At the helm of this empire was a king by the name of Shahryar, depicted here on our left. One day, the king has brought some devastating news. His wife has been cheating on him. In a fit of rage, he executes his wife. He then irrationally comes to believe that all women are unfaithful and decides to enact murderous revenge on all of them. Each day, he acquires a new bride, and by the next day's dawn, he has her executed. This pattern continues, marriage, consummation, execution, every day for 3 long and bloody years. In a twist, a woman, clever and beautiful, by the name of Shahrazad, inexplicably offers herself to the king. She, however, has a plan. Shahrazad's solution is to entertain the king at night with a story and end on a cliffhanger, hoping that the king's curiosity would delay her execution. Her stories also contained deep ethical messages through which Shahrazad hoped she might persuade the king to change his ways. Each night, for 1,001 nights, she tells the king her stories. And in the end, Shahrazad prevails. The king sees the wrongs of his ways and spares her life. Writers across the medieval world recognize the truth in Shahrazad's insight that kings and even lay people are not particularly persuaded by abstract discussions on what is right or what is wrong. My research demonstrates that writers of Latin, Persian, Arabic, and Italian all seem to have learned from the example of Shahrazad and used stories to persuade princes and to persuade people. I specifically look at the work of a storyteller by the name of Attar. The stories of this 13th century Persian poet had such a persuasive force that his literary style has been referred to as the horsewhip. He is also named by the famous mystic Rumi as one of his literary forefathers. My first question is, why did Attar prefer the form of short stories? I draw upon what is known in Arabic as the science of rhetoric to explain medieval theories of persuasion. I bring the Arabic and Persian answers to this question into conversation with those from the Latin and Greek tradition. My second question asks, how did Attar's stories convey their ethical messages? A story's meaning and its resonance is mediated by the author's narrative techniques, rhetorical strategies, and external references. Put simply, the medium is the message. I look at how the design of Attar's stories affected their persuasive force. In this respect, I believe the humanities can make an enduring contribution to our society today, where political, health, and climate crises may be different than the situation Shahrazad found herself in, but the problem of persuasion remains, as do the stakes, life and death. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was, you had about 2 or 3 more seconds left available to you. Our next presenter, next slide, please, is Angel Badawale from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, conversion of methane to useful oils via bacterial digestion.
I'm ready for my slide, please. Have you ever been in a major city and seen something that looks like the image on the left side of that slide? Or maybe you didn't see the fires directly, but you have a sensitive sense of smell like me, and you could just immediately tell that something was off. Well, that's what it looks like when natural gas is being vented. Natural gas is one of the most commonly vented gases in the world, and it consists primarily of a smaller gas called methane, which is made in processes such as oil and gas production and treatment of wastewater from factories. Now, just in case you're wondering, the effects of methane venting are far more significant than just the sight of smoke in cities or a smell that makes us uncomfortable. There's actually a broader air pollution problem at stake here. When in the air, methane absorbs heat from the sun and traps that heat in the Earth's atmosphere. Ultimately, this leads to an adverse effect on the temperature and the climate system of the Earth, and we don't want that. So my research comes in as part of a larger scientific effort to mitigate this air pollution problem. In my thesis, the focus is on a process that converts methane to useful oils so that it doesn't have to be vented. The real heroes in this process are called methanotrophic bacteria. Now, methanotrophic bacteria are simply little organisms that are so called because of their superhero ability to digest methane. Yes, the bacteria are able to digest methane that causes all of that air pollution problem and produce something useful out of it. And I think that's really cool. So how exactly does this process work? Well, as the bacteria digest methane, they produce oils in their bodies. And these oils can then be extracted, so we get something that looks more like the image on the right side of the slide. The oils produced will vary depending on the exact bacteria used, but they could range from edible oils for human consumption to oils used as fuel sources in vehicles. The central task of my thesis was to perform an economic analysis on the viability of this process. I conducted research on the cost of running the process from start to finish. So this includes capital and operating expenses, associated with growing the bacteria as well as extracting the oils. The results of my research show that current production costs for this process are actually higher than those of already established oil production processes. So I found that steps in research and development still need to be taken in order to reduce the cost of this process so that it can be profitable and competitive. Now, just to be clear, the question that my research does not answer is whether or not this process is worth exploring. Because frankly, any process that's able to reduce the negative impacts of methane on the earth is definitely worth exploring. Rather, the major question my research answers is how exactly can we run this process in a manner that yields profit? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. That was 4 seconds short of 3 minutes. Next slide, please. Our next presenter is Isabel del Palacio, The Subjectivity of Absence.
I'm ready for my slide. It is estimated that in Mexico, one person goes missing every 2 hours. Right now, it could be happening while you and I are here. The disappearance of people is a crime unlike any other. Due to the violation of multiple rights and the damage it causes, it is categorized as a crime against humanity. Good morning. My name is Isabel del Palacio, and for my doctoral dissertation, I researched the reconfiguration and the subjectivity of mothers of the disappeared. Disappearances create various effects on the families that suffer them. One of these is psychological and is usually expressed as great suffering. However, not all people react the same to this suffering. Some prefer to forget, others allow this feeling to consume them, and there are those who turn it into a reason for action. From critical psychology, my interest is understanding how the subjectivity of those who decide to act publicly changes. In particular, mothers of the disappeared who participate in family support groups. After interviewing 14 women, more than 20 hours of recording, and more than 2 years of observation, I was able to verify that there is a noticeable transformation on their subjectivity. Not only do their emotions change, but also the way of approaching the disappearance and even of perceiving themselves. The data gathered from the interviews with mothers of the disappeared point to 3 significant moments, each with different emotional expressions. But when they finally joined the support group, they learned to deal with the being of before the authorities and the civil society. The subjectivity of absence, which is what I have called this reconfigured subjectivity, is understood as the reflexive assimilation that favors positions of resistance, negotiation, and belonging on the part of the mothers of the disappeared. A verse from the song Sin Miedo, which means fearless, by singer-songwriter Vivir Quintana, come to mind. They planted fear in us, wings sprouted, which, from my point of view, illustrates very well the changes on the subjectivity that take place in mothers of the disappeared. Understanding the reconfiguration on the subjectivity of people affected by this problem is essential to later design therapeutic approaches that allow treating the pain caused by the unexpected and unpunished absence of a loved one. Therefore, I hope that this research will contribute to the understanding of the emotional dimension involved in the disappearance of people, not only in Jalisco, but in my country, Mexico, in general. Thank you.
Thank you. That was about 5 seconds short of 3 minutes. Our next presenter is Bishak Iyer, Weeding Out the Opioid Epidemic.
I'm ready for my slide. We have all experienced physical pain at some point in our lives. Now imagine having to live in constant pain day in and day out for years and decades with no end in sight. Sadly, this is a reality for millions of people suffering from chronic pain conditions. Such chronic pain patients are routinely prescribed opioids to help them cope with their pain. While these opioids are quite effective in the short term, their long-term use inevitably results in severe, unwanted, and debilitating side effects, such as addiction, withdrawal, and in extreme cases, a fatal overdose. Take a moment to consider this. Nearly 500,000 people have died from an opioid overdose in the United States alone in just the last 2 decades. The convergence of this opioid epidemic with the recent coronavirus pandemic has only worsened this public health crisis. Now, what if I were to tell you that there was a way to safely use these opioids for pain relief while avoiding their many side effects? My dissertation research focuses on achieving exactly that by targeting our body's own cannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a complex cell signaling system that regulates several biological processes such as immunity, metabolism, mood, and memory. Importantly, the CB2 receptors that are a part of this system also facilitate the pain relieving properties of cannabinoids without activating their side effects. Over the past few years, using a mouse model of chronic pain, I have been testing a novel drug called LY2828360 that activates these CB2 receptors. The combination of this drug along with morphine, one of the most commonly prescribed opioids, blocked 2 important opioid-induced side effects. One, this drug prevented the development of opioid addiction. And 2, it reduced the physical symptoms of opioid withdrawal. Amazingly, my research also showed that this combination therapy was a far more effective form of pain relief compared to using morphine alone. Think about that. You can imagine my excitement when I realized the potential for this combination therapy in combating the opioid epidemic. This is great, but it gets better. This drug has already been tested in humans and is safe for use. It's my hope that such novel combination therapies will greatly improve the lives of people suffering from chronic pain conditions and ultimately enable them to use opioid-based therapies both safely and effectively. Thank you.
That was just a few seconds over, but thank you very much. Our next presenter is Gabriella Main. Birth, what's love got to do with it?
I'm ready for my slide, thank you. Birth, what's love got to do with it? Well, apart from the obvious, when it comes to improving birth outcomes, a little love goes a long way. But before we talk about love, we have to talk about preterm birth. Preterm birth, or birth prior to 37 weeks gestation, is a leading cause of infant mortality in our country, and it's characterized by substantial racial and socioeconomic disparities. My research asks 2 questions. First, can we identify a woman who's at a heightened risk for preterm birth? And second, if so, what can we do to reduce that risk? The majority of preterm birth is idiopathic or spontaneous. That means we don't know why it happens, but we do know this. Chronic stress is a risk factor for preterm birth. You know, we've evolved to handle quite a bit of stress during pregnancy. So how do we know when it's too much stress? Well, here's where my first research question comes in. Specifically, we're looking for a biomarker for preterm birth. We performed a nested case control study using banked serum samples. We analyzed blood from 54 women, 27 women who gave birth preterm and 27 matched controls that gave birth at term. We determined blood concentrations for 6 different steroid hormones and neuroactive steroids at 2 time points in pregnancy. And here's what emerged. Cortisol. Yes, the stress hormone. Cortisol was different between these 2 groups. Women who gave birth preterm had significantly higher cortisol levels at their first blood sample, and then little to no change between samples. That is, they started high and plateaued, versus a normal trajectory where cortisol gradually increases, peaking in the 3rd trimester. The implications of this difference in cortisol is big. Imagine if with a simple blood test, we could track a woman's cortisol levels through pregnancy and identify if she's at a heightened risk for preterm birth. Well, we can. In fact, As part of my research, we developed a novel assay to measure these analytes during pregnancy. So if we can identify a woman who's at a heightened risk for preterm birth, well, what can we do to reduce that risk? Here's where the love comes back in. A growing body of research and recommendations from top agencies like the WHO tell us that love positively impacts birth, in part by reducing stress. And in this context, love looks like easy access to respectful mother-centered care. Love looks like birth advocates, such as doulas throughout pregnancy. Love looks like a mother surrounded by strong social support. And here's the thing, those examples I just gave, well, they actually lessen the racial and socioeconomic disparities I mentioned earlier. They actually reduce rates of preterm birth because in the end, love is like an antidote to chronic stress. So what's love got to do with birth? Maybe everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was right on 3 minutes. Next slide, please. Our next presenter is Ali Razi, University of Oklahoma, from benchtops to the operating rooms, 3D printed implants.
I am ready for my slide. One of the many things that we take for granted is how easy it is to talk, to laugh, to yawn. Well, not for everyone. 3 million Americans are experiencing one or more symptom of TMJ disorders, and more than 5,000 of them will seek surgery. Now, temporomandibular joint, or TMJ, is the joint that connects the lower jaw to the skull, and it controls all movements of the mouth. And TMJ disorders are a set of diseases that degenerate this joint. Unlike other joints, disorders of TMJ are more common in young people. In fact, some of you may have experienced some of its symptoms, such as clicking noises when you open your mouth, or headaches when you wake up from a nap. For those with advanced TMJ disorders, even talking is accompanied with excruciating pain. So what can we do? Currently, the standard treatment option is to remove the damaged joint and replace it with a metal implant. The problem is those are very expensive. And even at that, they're not suitable for everyone. Patients with metal hypersensitivity cannot accept these implants, and children often need follow-up surgeries to receive bigger implants as they grow. The extremely high cost of these implants are one thing, but think about the agonizing pain a teenager will go through in each surgery. So here's an idea. What if we could design an implant specifically for each patient that not only replicates the TMJ, it makes the TMJ heal itself? Only then we can avoid the multiple surgeries you would normally have with the children. And that's exactly what I'm working on, designing a bioengineered TMJ implant. This is how it works. It mimics the bone in both the structure and the biochemical composition. And once implanted, it'll degrade and gives its place to native bone to grow back. But how can we make patient-specific implants? And how could it possibly beat the generic metal implants when it comes to the cost? The answer is 3D printing technology. You can design and print very specific and complex implants based on the CT scan of each patient. The material used is much cheaper than titanium and gold, and it doesn't even require any fancy equipment. You can literally go to your local hypermarket and buy a 3D printer right now. Well, hopefully after my talk finishes. We've passed 7 animal surgeries with our implants, and we are continuing to improve our design based on the surgeon's feedback to prepare for human surgeries. And here's the more exciting part. The methods I've established for making TMJ implants could be used to develop implants for other joints as well. Knee joints, hip joints, shoulder joints. Then we're not talking about thousands of people, we're talking about millions of people who we can help with 3D printing. And I'm transitioning this technology from benchtops to the operating rooms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was about 5 seconds short. And Now I need to say, I mentioned that Vishak was a little over. That's because of operator error on my part. I started the timer too soon, so disregard the moderator in that case. Everybody's been meeting the timeline. Our next presenter, Bhargav Sanketi, To Be or Not to Be, Blueprint for a Small Intestine.
I'm ready for my slide. To be or not to be. My thesis explores the blueprint behind building a small intestine. Don't tell my advisor this, but I constantly listen to music or podcasts as I do my experiments in the lab. However, every day I face the constant struggle of having to untangle my earphones, because that is what you get when you take a long tube and try to fit it into a small cavity like your pocket. The human small intestine is about 22 feet long. That is 3.5 times the height of an average human being. So how does this really long tube fit into the relatively tiny abdominal cavity without getting all knotted up? Well, sometimes it doesn't. 1 in 500 babies that are born suffer from malrotation of the gut, predisposing them to a condition known as midgut volvulus, where the intestine gets all knotted up and then strangulates the blood supply to the gut, which means without major surgery trying to untangle the vasculature soon after the baby is born, this is lethal. And the worst part are the diagnostic symptoms used to identify volvulus in babies. Vomiting. Every baby vomits, making it impossible to diagnose. So to counter this, we set out to identify how the gut gets looped in the first place. Our first clue came from the fact that looping topologies of the gut is surprisingly stereotypical across individuals of the same species. Simply what I mean by this is if you opened up and looked at your own gut and then opened up and looked at your friend's gut, the pattern of the loops should be identical. They would no longer be your friend, so take my word for it. Secondly, we find that across animals and birds, the first step in making a looped intestine is for the embryonic gut tube, which is straight, to go under a counterclockwise rotation. This is also the same time that the blood supply is being established, which means if this rotation happens too fast or too slow, this could end up leading to volvulus, where the blood supply gets strangulated by the gut tube. In my research, I've identified 2 genes. One is an accelerator and the other is a brake. Increasing the accelerator gene speeds up gut rotation, while increasing the brake gene slows it down. Usually there are driver genes in place controlling how much accelerator and how much brake to apply, but sometimes they mess up. So my research shows that by controlling and tuning these accelerator and brake genes, we might actually be able to control volvulus from happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. But Bhargav, you still have 10 seconds if you wanted to use them. Next slide. Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Austin Tapp, More Than a Bone to Pick, letting the cat scan out of the bag.
I'm ready for my slide. For most kids, getting ready for school starts off with a question. What am I going to wear today? But unfortunately for some, that question is, what can I wear today? What can I wear so no one knows my right shoulder sits higher than my left one? What can I wear so no one sees my hips are uneven? What can I wear to hide my body from bullies who might call me hunchback or monster? These are just a few of the thoughts racing through the mind of a teen who has been diagnosed with adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. Adolescent idiopathic scoliosis is a disease with no known cause that results in an irregular curvature of the spine. It affects over 4 million children every year. Tens of thousands of these children have such severe scoliosis that they must undergo posterior spinal fusion surgery, an intense, grueling operation. It requires an incision down the full length of the back, followed by the removal of soft tissues and pieces of the spine. Then, screws are drilled into the vertebra, a steel rod is threaded through the screw heads, and a surgeon straightens out the spine by tightening the rod in place. To be sure everything stays straight, the bits of the spine that were removed earlier are ground into a paste and used to glue the vertebra to one another. The minimum recovery time for this procedure is 6 months. My dissertation research enhances surgical planning with groundbreaking modeling techniques to make operations like posterior spinal fusion more precise and less invasive, improving outcomes and reducing patient recovery time. By using medical images, I'm able to warp a generic anatomical mesh so that the mesh matches a patient's CAT scan, like what is seen on the far left. By using medical images to warp the generic mesh, shown in the center, I'm able to produce a highly detailed 3D version of the patient. The image on the far right is the result, a completely reconstructed patient spinal column. Currently, I'm building upon my methods to develop the rib cage and produce an entire patient torso model from a single routine image. This reconstruction technique is revolutionary because it allows us to see anatomy that is invisible in current medical imaging. Ligaments, discs, and other soft tissues of the spine are now easily visualized in the patient's model. Surgeons can use this model to plan for operations like never before. The knowledge of the now visible soft tissues allows surgeons to determine ideal strategies for scoliosis correction. In the case of the posterior spinal fusion approach, this means fewer screws, smaller incisions, and better results. So that in less than 6 months, the question those teens ask themselves is, what do I get to wear today? A tank top? Or maybe something with an open back? Thank you.
Thank you. That was about 10 seconds short of 3 minutes. And our next presenter is Elena Varner, a Bumblebee Nest Site Roadmap, the saving grace of mouse pee.
Thank you. I'm ready for my slide. Bumblebee populations across North America are in a nosedive, dropping as much as 87% in just 2 decades. In response, people have planted millions of pollinator gardens, brimming with flowers to give worker bees a buffet. Fantastic. But these gardens miss a vital part of the conservation picture. So let's set the scene. After a long winter hibernating, a lone queen emerges on her own and is immediately on a mission to start her colony. To do this, she first has to find a place for her colony to live. She checks pollinator gardens for the bumblebee equivalent of a bed and breakfast and finds nothing. But what exactly is she looking for? Well, people have noticed that bumblebee colonies tend to pop up in old mouse burrows. Makes sense, like a furnished apartment, it's move-in ready, no digging required. Assuming she is searching for a mouse burrow, imagine what that must look like to a flying queen. The entrance is 2 to 3 centimeters across. That's a diameter of a quarter, which is then hidden below tall grass or leaf litter. How the heck can she spot a small, visually obscured hole in the ground? She might as well be looking for a needle in the haystack, which begs the question, is she really visually looking for it at all? Stumped, I turned to the actual nest searching behavior of queens themselves and learned they do this very characteristic zigzag flight pattern with an overall forward motion. Bingo. This immediately reminded me of what a fly, albatross, and rat all have in common, their behavioral mechanism for odor tracking. See, this graph top left actually depicts how animals repeatedly transect an odor plume, going beyond and returning to its pungent center, resulting in, you guessed it, a zigzag pattern with the overall forward motion. So maybe bumblebee queens follow mouse scent to find burrows. Elated, I couldn't wait to test my prediction. First step, collect mouse pee. Gross, but it would allow me to do a pretty cool test. Using bumblebee boxes or bird boxes with a smaller entrance, I put mouse pee in them next to an unscented control, functionally presenting queens with a choice between the two. Later, I opened them to find 17 colonies in the ones with mouse pee and only 6 with the control. That's nearly 3 times more colonies in mouse pee laden boxes, proving that mouse pee provides a roadmap for bumblebee queens to find nest sites in spring. With this, we can direct queens to supplemental nesting sites to one day turn a million pollinator gardens into bumblebee bed and breakfast. Then I will finally exclaim, there is a saving grace to mouse pee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, that was about 15 seconds under 3 minutes. Thank you to all of our presenters. That's the last of our presentations. We're going to do the People's Choice voting. You have that option now. please, we'll leave it open for about 5 minutes. Please do vote. Please don't share the voting URL with anyone else. It's just for each of the sort of formal Zoom attendees, and you can each vote only once. So if there are multiple users looking in on a screen, that device can only vote once. So appreciate it if you would stick to that. We're going to go ahead and have a discussion. So here are just a reminder of the presenters. And the survey link was shared in the chat. And I'll invite all of the presenters to turn your cameras back on. We have a number of questions that we wanted to pose, and certainly if there are questions from the audience, please put them in the chat and we'll get to those as we have time. And I encourage you all to switch to a gallery view so you can see all the presenters. So, and I'm just going to pose some questions. Feel free to perhaps raise your hand, and that way I can call on you. And you don't have to answer all of the questions, each of you. But I'm curious, what drew you to the 3MT initially? Did anything about this whole activity surprise you? Ali?
Sure, yeah, I would like to answer to this question. When I first moved to the United States a couple of years back, I was constantly looking for ways to sort of improve my speaking skills. And so at the time I was skating quite a lot, and I would go to the skate park and I would just pitch my research to whoever was at the park. And more often than not, I was the only engineer at the park. So I sort of had to tone my pitch in a way that it is more accessible to a wider audience of no technical background. And I gradually realized I was doing a better job than I expected, in that they were like legitimately interested in the topic, and they were not like just suffering through it. So I thought maybe there's something to it. And around the same time, I was also like making some YouTube videos about 3D renderings, and like I was just getting into it as a hobby. And so when I heard about the 3-minute thesis and you have to make your own slide with all the original graphics, I thought it's a good opportunity to sort of combine, you know, that hobby of mine and this skill that I was working on at the time to present it in a more professional package to an audience. So this was a really great opportunity.
Great, thank you. Anthony?
Yes, a couple of years ago, I think I was in my year 3 or so. So I was in the lunchroom having some chat, and one of the professors said, if there's a research you're doing and you cannot explain it to a grade 6 student, and the student will understand what you're saying, well, most likely you don't know what you are doing. So I got challenged, and I looked at my proposal, I looked at what I was working on. I began to ask myself, can I explain this to a grade 6 student and the student will understand? And that was a challenge, you know. Then I started, you know, breaking down my research, you know, into a way that the layman can understand, because the benefit is to explain to the public in such a way that they can understand. That's where the benefit of your research comes in. So I did that. Then at some point I applied for my faculty. Then I discussed with my supervisor, you know, looking at what I've discussed with respect to my research. And it was interesting to know that it's very difficult to really break down a technical research into a layman language. So I found that very challenging, but eventually I was able to, you know, break it down in a way that people could understand. And I presented in the faculty, and it was awesome. I actually won in the faculty, but I thought I got it all put together. Then I went to the university competition, and then they bounced me out. You know, then I got to understand that, you know, you need to constantly improve on how to communicate your research to the general public. And that was the beginning of my journey into 3MT. Yeah.
Thank you. Isabel?
Well, I decided to accept the invitation to participate in this forum because for me it's a very exciting experience to make my research known internationally. And it's quite a challenge to transmit what I have been working on the last 3 years in another language. So I decided to participate, and it's a challenge for me. It was a challenge for me. Thanks.
It's a challenge you accepted in quite well, I might say. So let me move on and ask a question. For some of you, you're conducting, basic research that may not be tied really clearly to a popular or well-known societal challenge. How do you convince your audience in 3 minutes that your research is important? Anybody want to take that one for us?
Sure. I mean, maybe this doesn't directly answer the question, but I think that all of our research in a way is tied to a societal problem because, I mean, if you look at kind of the political and kind of social context that we're living in, there is, of course, there's a real pandemic, but there's also, I would say, a pandemic of ignorance, of misinformation, of kind of alternative facts or conspiratorial thinking. And so I think anyone who takes it upon themselves to devote 2 or 3 years or 4 or 5 or 6 to a specific, research project, I think that in and of itself is contributing and helping to kind of, at least begin to solve a problem in our society that I think is probably bigger than just kind of the university. And I think that part of the research process is thinking to yourself of how my research speaks to larger problems and then going back and revising your research. So there's a constant kind of, dialectic and there's an iterative process where I think we all want to contribute in some way.
Sure.
And I think part of the research process is figuring out not just what we're curious about or intellectually curious about, but where can our research really contribute to society? So I think everyone's research really is quite valuable in that sense.
Yes, and I didn't mean to say that it wasn't. It was more that some research, the audience immediately says, oh, I see why it's relevant. And others, as you just said, it's really incumbent upon you as presenters to help them see that path and see that relevance. Anthony?
Yes, I strongly agree with what Faraz just said. We are all contributing our quota to a better tomorrow, a better community. But one thing I know with respect to your question is that your passion can say it all. When you are doing the research and the passion is in it, people can feel that, people can seal that, and it makes it easier for you to convince people because you are passionate about what you're doing. Because I remember there was a year I went for a conference and my research is about pregnancy and health implication. And someone came to me after the conference and said, wow, I've never seen a guy talk about pregnancy so passionately like you. That was something that I think is very awesome because people can see how passionate you are about contributing your quota or contributing your research to a better tomorrow.
And let me say that, you've hit on something that's really key in this space, which is I think sometimes scholars think that they should be dispassionate, right? And totally removed and objective. And that doesn't work. Passion is really critical in everything that we do. Gabriella.
Yeah, I had to jump in at passion. Anthony, obviously our research overlaps quite a bit, caring about, maternal infant health. And just to piggyback on that thought, I think something that's been so beneficial through this process for me personally has been that you are passionate, or I'm passionate about this subject. And then I decided, by making it 3 minutes, you leave stuff out, you decide on what you want to say, and then you don't know if it's going to be received. Like you take that step. And obviously we all got confirmation because we're here that it was received, which is wonderful, and it propels that passion and that inspiration. But I do think that's been the most fun, is that when the little budding of our 3 MTs, and then it's like, put it out to the world and see if people care with what you care about.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm going to switch slightly here and say, for those of you who are conducting research where the connection to a societal challenge is really obvious, right? Working on COVID-19 or something. It might be relatively easy to convince your audience that your research is important, and yet your findings are likely contributing just a small piece to this the solution of this very complex societal challenge. How do you strike the balance between talking about the relevance of your work without exaggerating your work's impact and making it clear what your contribution is? Vishak?
Yeah, I mean, my talk, for instance, it deals with the opioid epidemic, and everybody's familiar with the concept. And like you were saying, it's very easy that, when we as researchers see our work being put out in the media outlets and these kind of things, that sometimes you see these really exaggerated claims about them. So I think in that way, the 3MT has really helped that, while it is important to know the big picture of your research, that you convey that information to the public in an accessible manner, but don't, make it sound like you've discovered the next silver bullet, like this is what it is, like, this is going to be the end of the research. It's just a stepping stone. Journey is still ahead, is I feel always the message that we should try to convey.
Very good, thank you. Elena?
Thank you. I love this question. So my research was on bumblebees, and I feel like it's very popular talking about bees in general. And the other half of my research is about mice and rats, which I didn't really get into today. But I have this dichotomy between like a beloved species that everyone immediately acknowledges, and then the polar opposite of that, making people cringe and jump up on chairs. But yeah, so it was interesting for me to like change gears in that sense, and talk about something people immediately recognize. On that note, it was really helpful to be able to not have to emphasize the importance of the species broadly, but just specifically my work. So that's been really an advantage. But also, it's really important to really cut to the chase in a sense, because one thing 3-minute thesis has helped me with a lot is being able to communicate science, obviously. And I've brought that over into my science policy work, where there's an incredible amount of overlap. So you need to be able to quickly tell important decision makers exactly what they need to know, nothing more, nothing less. So yeah,
Very good.
It's been a great experience.
Angel?
Yes, I think that's a really great question, Dr. Lanian. I feel like with my research being in sort of the climate change mitigation space, I can totally relate. So that first picture with like methane venting, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. And I actually found it challenging. Like my piece of the pie is like really small, right? And so what I did was to sort of explain that my research fits into this broader picture. And I think it's really helpful to first state the background, like the broader picture, and then narrow it down slowly. So mentioning that my research is part of a larger effort, and then really honing in on what is the exact contribution of my research. So it's that economic piece, and it helps us to make climate change mitigation decisions that are also economical. So I think it's basically using language that just sort of explicitly expresses that your research is part of a bigger picture, and then specifying the contribution and what that contribution can be used for.
Good, thank you. Isabel?
Well, I'm sure that the problem that I research is a very important problem in my country, in Mexico. But I also know that there are many perspectives from which this problem should be approached. And the psychological perspective is only one of them. And even from psychology, there are several perspectives from which one can try to understand the impact of this phenomenon on the population. Therefore, I believe that the impact that my research can have is very important, but I don't believe that it is the only one or the best one. I believe that it is necessary to continue doing the research of these kind of things in order to contribute to the understanding and relief of the suffering that disappearance of people generates in the relatives who suffer from it.
That's great. As I think about all of your responses, it strikes me that we've just made your jobs more difficult in that, in addition to conveying the nature of your research, one of the things we're also suggesting, you're all suggesting you should be conveying, is to make sure that people understand there typically aren't simple solutions.
Mhm.
Difficult problems require complex solutions to which you're contributing, but it's part of a big picture, and that's an important message. Bhargav?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's kind of summarized what I was trying to get at too, but I don't particularly know if my research is obviously relevant or, fits into where. But one thing I can say for sure is that I think most often when researchers tackle problems, it comes from a place of curiosity, where you're curious about why the world works the way that it works. So I may be curious about why the gut loops, and somebody else may be curious about why something else happens. And that's where it's really coming from. And I believe that any knowledge, if you can find out new things about anything, it is going to become relevant in the long run, right? Because something that was discovered in the 60s might really come into fruition today, like mRNA vaccines, for an example. 30 years ago, they discovered it, but like now is when we realize its value. And I think we should not really, I think it's really important to show audience why this is important, but I also think it's important to lead them on a journey through that curiosity-driven experience, where that's where this all started anyway. So I think that's my 2 cents on this.
So then here's the challenge, right? So we're going to lead them on this path. We're going to explain our research, but what do you do when the public may not actually want to believe what you're saying? Right? What else do you as emerging scientists and scholars need to do in order to be seen as trustworthy sources of information? Austin.
So one thing that comes to mind when I hear this question is, the enemy of discussing science with the public is not complexity and the intensity of the science, but rather the confusion that might surround the complexity of it. And so by doing the talks like this, where we have a chance to relate to the general public and discuss a lot of things with them in a manner that is digestible for them in the short term, we're able to sort of dissuade some of that confusion which surrounds the complexity of our work. I think everyone here has already mentioned how difficult and also fun it is to distill your work and the information that you have determined in your studies into a general audience type presentation. It's helpful for the purposes of writing grants and other research. And so throughout this time, while we're working on this and producing our results, while they may be complex and while we may want to describe their complexities to our peers in an intense way, by reducing that complexity, boiling it down a little bit, we can help the general audience to understand and then combat this confusion that it surrounds, regardless of how difficult the topic is.
Thank you. Vishak?
Yeah, I completely agree, Austin. I think that, as early career scientists and graduate students, I think we have a responsibility to, engage with the general public and, really convey the impact that our research is having, in lives. I mean, we all, of course, many of us do publish papers and those kind of things and convey stuff in a very technical manner to our peers, and that helps science. But I feel that we also have a responsibility in terms of just general public and informing them about our research and just engaging with the public even more.
Elena.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you've both just said, but that's something that 3-minute thesis has really taught me the value of, is translating the science. So specifically echoing what Austin has said, making sure that you bring your work and sort of strip it of the detail that we as scientists easily get neck deep in, so that the general public can digest it and understand it. But also I want to echo, I'll sound like a broken record here, but that same translation of science also goes into science policy, it goes into teaching, it goes into outreach. So the applications are really very wide. But the other thing that I'll mention that I think is important to to touch on here is trying to publish in open source journals so that the public can just have access to the science to begin with. But yeah.
Anthony.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with all that has been said, but one thing I've discovered is that a lot of people out there are actually looking for answers. When it comes to mental health, it comes to pregnancy, it comes to fetal outcomes, a lot of people are looking for answers. So in that line, your relevance can easily be accepted, but passing the message is the big deal, like we have said today, and that's what 3MT has done to a lot of us. Now these days, I don't have to use technical jargons to communicate in a simple conversation with people that are not from my kind of background and things like that. So I believe 3MT has really done a good job to someone like me who is so technical when having conversation to, just having a simple conversation and driving home the message, And when you meet someone that is really looking for an answer and you have something that can lead them on, you have resources you can lead them to and things like that, I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Bhargav?
Yeah, no, all this is really interesting. So research shows that scientists are among actually the most trusted people in society, but also they're thought of as the most arrogant people in society. And that often works against them. So most often when somebody doesn't go along with the science or does not fully recognize the science in a subject, it doesn't come from a place of wanting to not trust the science, but it comes from a place of fear or like not having clarity about the subject. And I think that is where, like us as scientists and as science communicators, we have a lot of responsibility to approach the subject as a teaching experience and a learning experience. Because when you learn why somebody mistrusts your science or mistrusts anything, then you can actually figure out how to communicate it in a way that it actually does make sense. Because I think we are trusted, we are just not good at communicating our science.
I would add that we're also unknown to a lot of people, right? It's just sort of this, the scientists say, and what you all have done today is demonstrate that you're real people, that you're approachable, and you're not talking down to your audience. And those are all key parts of successful communication and addressing this. And I would agree 3MT is a great format for doing this. For us?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything that everyone has said. And I guess as a non-scientist looking from the outside, 3MT and everyone's contribution is exactly, I think, what science communication is about. And one thing I've really noticed in listening to, science, and especially the very good science 3MTs, is that all of them contain an element of storytelling, frankly. And I mean, that is, of course, what I study, but I mean, for example, even just today in Austin's excellent presentation where he, it tells you, imagine a kid, who's being bullied, and like those types of creative outputs, I think is something that, not every scientist can be a writer or a creative, a writer or something. But personally, I've learned a lot of science through science fiction. Ted Chiang, for example, is an amazing contemporary American novelist who deals with the implications of AI technology. And sometimes the most accessible way to communicate and to teach someone something is when they don't even realize you're doing it. And I think creative outputs are one way in which you can achieve that. And one reason I really love the 3MT is because it gives me a chance to talk to scientists. And I think that there needs to be more talk between the humanities and the sciences. We both have things to offer each other. And sometimes we, get siloed in our independent fields. And I think that that's one way in which we can kind of, regain credibility amongst, the general public.
Excellent point. This isn't just about communicating with the lay public, but actually with the rest of the scholarly community, broadly defined. Isabel.
Well, I think it's important to let humanities students know that this contest, 3MT, is a very important forum to publicize the research that is being done at a social level. I think in this way, you can aspire to greater academic and maybe financial support too. So it's very important. It's a very important forum, I think.
So let me put that right back to you. So why do you think that the humanities tend to be underrepresented in 3MT, and what could we as institutions, as CGS, do to encourage more humanists to participate?
Well, I don't know exactly what to do, but I think it's important to students of humanities to know that it's a very important forum to publicize the research on social level. I don't know how to do this.
So while the rest of the presenters are thinking, I actually put that all to those in the audience as well. If you have any suggestions on this, I can tell you that the graduate education community would love to hear it. Ali.
Well, I was thinking about like how to prepare for the 3-minute thesis in the beginning. And one of the things I usually do is I just go to YouTube and find the winners of past years. And that's one good resource that happens to be more often than not only from STEAM or STEM fields. And so I looked at a bunch of like say tutorials, and those also happen to be at STEM. I'm thinking if principals or school officials were actually to sit down and make tutorials on like how to do the same thing, but for a different field or a different genre of presentation, really, because it's you can't just use the same template to do like a scientific research versus a humanities research. And if there were more resources, it is possible that more people would just at least more easily get into it.
Angel?
So I'm in STEM, so I can't really speak to why a lot of students in like the humanities don't participate. But an idea that I just thought about is Anthony mentioned that you actually had departmental competitions for the 3-minute thesis. So I think that might be a good idea, because at my institution, we just had a graduate school-wide competition. So that was sort of open, like an open bucket. And so we just saw different departments represented in the overall grad school competitions. But if schools sort of did like a department competition that then progressed to the like graduate school wide, I think that would encourage competition like within all the departments across the institution. So that's just an idea.
Thank you. Others? For us.
So yes, of course, I am in the humanities, but perhaps I'm not the correct person to ask this, because I love the 3MT, and we're obviously looking for people in the humanities who haven't. I might say that one thing that really kind of persuaded me to participate in the 3MT at the very beginning was a 3MT that I saw online, I believe from the University of Australia, one of those down there. And the talk was very simply called "Now You See It." I'm not sure if others have also seen this one. And the individual slide was just a blank white slide. And I wouldn't want to ruin it, but it basically talks about the concept of whiteness and racism. And it did so in a way that totally broke the kind of conventions of the 3MT genre. So just as an earlier individual mentioned, I think it was Ali, you cannot just graft a humanities presentation onto the sciences. And even my presentation, for example, I spent a lot of it kind of, telling a bit of a story. That might not work in a science context. And so there are, I agree, we need workshops, we need kind of more examples. I think people in the humanities who do end up doing well, I was lucky to have good mentorship from individuals in the past who, English departments, for example, who went on and to compete fine further. But I think really this, again, is not an isolated issue. The humanities and the departments of the humanities for, I don't know, 20, 30, you might even know this better than myself, have been, consistently underfunded. And I think that's created a bit of self-doubt that we're not winning the big grants. And so people don't care about our research. And the reason 3MT is so great is because you don't have to have won a humongous grant. There is still amazing research being done, humanities, STEM, social sciences, whatever, that doesn't come with a huge price tag or big grant figure with it. And so I think these are broader discussions, and 3MT is a reflection of graduate school. And so maybe those are just some initial thoughts.
Great, thank you. Gabriella.
I was just going to mention I'm following the chat, and there's some really great ideas in there. And just to kind of piggyback on what people are saying, I think this is like a top-down and also bottom-up approach. I think that how we as researchers feel about our research. I'm an anthropologist, but I did pretty biomedical heavy research, so I felt comfortable. But I do remember when my advisor suggested I do this, and when I saw the email, it even words like research and share, share your poster, which is often associated with scientific posters. And so just the lingo is very much heavy on the STEM side. But then I loved that suggestion of let's post some humanities videos on the National 3MT sites, give people the opportunity to see it, because it has such great potential. 3 minutes is exactly the impact that outside of this venue, it's also perfect, like Faraz was just saying. So let's get it out there. I think that's a great initiative.
Very good. I'm going to pose one last question here. So I think all of you in your own way at various times have said that you learned a lot from doing this, but we also know that one of the ways we learn is by making mistakes. And I'm just curious, did you make any mistakes that you learned from while doing this that you'd like to share with others? Ali?
So when I first started this, I think for some reason, well, I know the reason, I was just very heavy on the rendering. I just wanted to show off with my renderings. And so I was filling the entire slide with like 10, 20 renderings, right? And then I showed it to people, and it was so, I tried to be technical and like good looking in terms of the slide. And it was just not the way. People were not following what I was saying. It was so hard to navigate in this slide, like where I'm talking about right now. And so I think you have to get your priorities right to a sense. And that was like one of the problems I had early on.
Less is more sometimes. Anthony.
Yes, I think I can resonate with what Hailey just said. But with respect to my experience, I mentioned earlier that I started from the faculty level, and that year I won, and I thought I had it all. Then I went to the university competition, then I was kicked out. And then I had to go back the second year, then I won the second year. So, but what I learned in that journey was that sometimes to continue to succeed in life, you need to continue to improve on yourself. And I asked myself, if I say this thing is good, compared to what? If it is good at this level, if I move it to the next level, is it still good? So one of the mistakes I made in the past is that I just relaxed. I thought I had it all put together, then I didn't improve on it. Then I got to know, I learned in a hard way that no matter how beautiful your presentation is, always look for an opportunity to improve on it. And that was actually one of the biggest lessons I've learned from 3MT. Yeah.
Elena.
Yeah, I think I would speak less to mistakes and more about the process. So writing this script for the 3 minutes for me, I think was initially like a 12 minutes worth of writing. But then really whittling it down to the bare bones of exactly what you need and no more. That process was really illuminating to me, to just see like how little you need to say to convey your meaning. But then also going back to the approach of telling it like a story. I, as a scientist, I love being a scientist, so I want to share that with the audience and bring them through the scientific process and how the experiments come to be to begin with. So narrowing the script down to meet 3 minutes to begin with, and then weaving back in that storyline has been really helpful. And also, like, every time I go back to it, there are improvements. So I would say, again, it's a process. Don't think you're gonna write it first draft and be done.
And I would just tag on before we end, part of that process is getting to see your co-presenters. Like, that's something I have just loved. And thank you all today, and especially to the non-English speakers. Like, wow, I am so impressed. It's hard enough to do it in your native language. So that's been the highlight, is just seeing how other people present it. And and taking that, to help your own. So thank you all. That was really cool.
Dishak.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, one of the things that kind of helped me make my, final script was to actually start by working through, keywords. So keywords is something that we normally always write in our papers. So instead of, parsing things down, I thought I'd build up. So, building up from keywords like pain, addiction, and then, start putting the story around it. So that really helped me, that sort of an approach. So it's just my 2 cents on how I went about it.
Well, thank you all very, very much. Thank you for your presentations. Thank you for such thoughtful answers to these questions. So let me say, there actually is a winner. I will tell you, you'll be shocked to know that it was really, really close. But the 2020 CGS 3MT People's Choice winner is Bhargav Sanketi. To be or not to be, Blueprint for a Small Intestine, Cornell University. Congratulations. And congratulations to you all. Bhargav, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you so much for 3MT and CGS for pulling together this event. This year has been really fun, competing in different 3MT competitions and learning about all new things. What everybody presented here was amazing, and I was so happy that I could join and hear everybody here. I would like to thank my lab members and my advisor, Natasha Kripios, and obviously I would like to thank my family and my partner, Sharda, who helped me a lot in preparing this presentation and rehearsing it. So thank you, everybody, and this has been a truly wonderful experience.
Thank you.
Congratulations to everybody.
And thank you to the audience. Thank you for participating. Thank you for, we have, according to my slide thing here, 207 folks logged in right now, which is fabulous. And a reminder for those of you who may only have tuned into this particular competition, these folks have presented multiple times on their campuses, which is just getting the word out, both about 3MT, but about their research. And to Gabriella's point, the opportunity for interdisciplinarity, to hear what others are doing. There's such siloing in higher ed these days and scholarship that any opportunity like this to bring together humanists, social scientists, STEM scientists of various kinds is really, really critical. And I applaud all of you for taking this opportunity. So thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. I think maybe, yes, we have one more slide. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Scott. That was awesome.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Congratulations.